Chapter 5, Applying the Less More Philosophy. When the author arrived at Dwayne's office, he found an elder statesman who had been working with the entrepreneur for many years. Dwayne had an easy style and grace that was inviting. When he smiled and told the author to have a seat in the discussion area of his office, the author felt privileged. So Phil's been talking to you about closing the learning doing gap, Dwayne said. He sure has, said the author. I've seen how people, including myself, have a real challenge closing that gap. Phil says that people have to learn less more. Dwayne smiled. That philosophy drives everything we do in our training, development, and educational efforts in all of the companies that the entrepreneur owns. When do you think about that philosophy? Asked the author. Does it really work? Dwayne nodded. Before I started working with Phil, I was the typical training director. I spent more time looking for the next new management concept that I did following up that I'd just taught our people. I would help design a tremendous training program, run everybody through it, and then look for the next new training idea. The way I judged my effectiveness was my attitudinal evaluations that participants filled out at the end of seminar about how they liked it. We always got high grades, but the trainings weren't all that effective. People didn't really apply what we were teaching them. How did you change that? Asked the author. When we learned from Phil that less learned more is best, we began to concentrate on a few concepts we felt people should learn. Spaced repetition became our motto. Now we teach important concepts over and over again until they become ingrained in the way people think and behave. So you're spending more time following up training than creating new training programs? Yes, Dwayne. Yes, Dwayne said. We spend significantly more time on following up than we do designing, organizing, and delivering our training. And we think our people are better trained than anyone, anywhere. It sounded good, but the author was skeptical. Could you give me an example? He asked. Sure, said Dwayne. A number of years ago, we decided that we wanted to create legendary customer service. We didn't want to merely satisfy the customers, we wanted to blow them away. When you deliver legendary customer service, customers are so excited about how you treat them that they want to brag about you. They become part of your sales force. We decided that this would be an ongoing effort. We would drill deep, teaching less more, and repeat the teaching again and again. The author raised an eyebrow. So, how's that working for you? He asked. We've seen measurable and sometimes dramatic results in both customer and employee satisfaction. We're constantly training and updating our people on new ideas about how to give legendary customer service. If any new concept comes along in customer service, we integrate it into what we already are doing rather than sending our people off in a different direction. That's interesting, said the author. I gave a speech at a company recently, and they had a big banner behind me on the stage that said, "The Year of the Customer." When I saw it, I laughed and said, "What's next year?" After talking to you, I'm sure you know why I said that. It seemed to me that every year should be the year of the customer. After talking to you and Phil, I guess the way you make that happen is to reinforce the message year after year through spaced repetition. Absolutely, said Dwayne. That's why we're constantly pushing our people to get better at delivering legendary service rather than a book of the month club. We give our people a few books for a whole year. We pick out the best customer service books we can find and have everyone read them several times, continuing to cull useful information from them. We want to apply what we read if it makes any sense to us. Everyone also goes through a 2-day legendary service training program every year. The concepts we teach are the same, but we teach them differently each year. We also bring in some new concepts, but make sure that they are all well integrated into what they learned last year. As training director, I keep reinforcing the message until our people's knowledge turns into a positive attitude. And that good attitude turns into behavior that creates raving fan customers who sing our praises. Sounds like a good strategy, said the author. It's a strategy that can lead to quantum leaps for our company, Dwayne said. We want our people to know that they are doing so well that they can almost go on automatic pilot. When that occurs, they can make something big happen. What do you mean? Asked the author. If people thoroughly know what we are trying to accomplish with our customers and they've completely mastered every aspect of their jobs, they don't have to think about their responsibilities. Their minds are free to watch for opportunities to create stories that will blow your customers away. Can you give me an example? Sure, said Dwayne. One great example comes from the front desk of our corporate headquarters, where people are greeted and the phones are answered. Our front desk people call themselves directors of first impressions. They are constantly thinking of ways they can get to know our customers, anticipate their needs, and become their friends, both when they walk in our corporate headquarters and when they call us on the phone. For example, we tell them what when the light goes on to indicate there's a call, they should calm themselves, recognizing that they have a service opportunity, particularly when someone calls to complain. When you say service opportunity, what do you mean? Asked the author. That will be clear when you hear my story, said Wayne. Last week I saw Stephanie, one of our directors of First Impressions. She had a big smile on her face as I approached. I asked her what was going on, and she told me she had a great story to share. The day before, she'd been answering phones. She said when the phone rang, the light went on. She quieted herself down, remembering that this was a service opportunity. No sooner did she pick up the phone than this guy started yelling into her ear. I'm your worst nightmare, the guy shouted at her. Without losing a beat, she said, Is that you, Alex? When she said, when he said, Who's Alex? She shouted back, My ex-husband. Dwayne chuckled at the memory. Stephanie said it totally diffused the guy's anger. He howled with laughter. Turns out the guy had an ex-wife who was a nightmare too. She and the customer became good buddies after that. Sounds like Stephanie has a pretty quick wit, the author remarked. Yes, said Dwayne. I asked her how she came up with that so quickly. She said that ever since she'd gotten the idea that every call was an opportunity to serve, she'd been getting more and more creative. So when the man started yelling at her, the first person she thought of was her ex-husband. The author nodded. I'm beginning to get the power of what you're saying, he said. Once people have really mastered their jobs through the less, more philosophy and spaced repetition, they can get creative and become extraordinary. As the author's conversations wound down with Dwayne, he thanked him for his time. On the way back to Phil's home for lunch, he realized that he had already learned a great deal. A short time later, the author arrived at Phil's house. As he turned into the driveway, he made a mental note to carve out some time to go to the golf school his friend had attended. It fit into what he was learning from the entrepreneur, and it might not hurt his game either. Before he got out of the car, he got out a little notebook and wrote in clear, neat handwriting some summary notes on what he had learned about information overload. This is what he wrote down. Reasons why people don't put their know-how into action. Number one, information overload. We retain only a small fraction of what we read and hear only once. Therefore, we should read and learn less more and not more less. To master something, we should focus on a few key concepts, repeat them over time, immerse ourselves deeply in them, and expand on the ideas and skills. Spaced repetition is key. Once people have mastered their jobs, they are better able to create and to be creative and make big things happen. Next chapter, reason number 2, negative filtering. After Phil greeted the author, he led him to the family dining room, where a beautiful lunch of salmon and rice, pilaf, had been prepared. As they sat down to eat, the entrepreneur said, Are you getting the kind of information you wanted? Yes, said the author. What I need to do is write the information down and review it over time, don't I? As I said before, you're a quick learner, said Phil. The author said, I think I understand how to focus and repetition overcome the first reason why people don't do what they know. I'm ready to hear about the second reason. Didn't you say it had something to do with stinking thinking? The entrepreneur smiled. You're right. People are often too negative, which gives them an inadequate filtering system. Let me ask you a question. If Positive thinking more powerful than negative thinking? Yes, I would say so, said the author. Then tell me, said Phil, is it a choice? Do you get to choose between positive thinking and negative thinking? Of course you do, said the author. Then why don't most people choose positive thinking over negative thinking? The author took a drink of his water, pondering his answer. That's a good question, he replied. Now that you mention it, negative thinking is much more prevalent among people than positive thinking. I wonder why. Phil went quiet for a moment. We're often programmed that way, he said. How so? Said the author. When we come into the world, we are completely dependent on our parents or surrogate parents, those who chose to raise us, and we have no choice about who these people are or what the circumstances will be like. Right from the beginning, I think all of us are searching for unconditional love. We don't want to be loved conditionally. Depending on what we do or say on any given day, we want to be loved for who we are. Unfortunately, all the people who are gathered around us, our parents and other adults, have haven't necessarily gotten this kind of unconditional love themselves, which makes it hard for them to give it. Thus, they tend to love us conditionally based on our behavior. So we are constantly trying to do things to gain approval and a sense of belonging. How does this relate to negative thinking, though? Asked the author. As kids, we tried to get attention through our achievements, seeking praise and approval from our parents. It was a frustrating process because, like all of us, our parents tended to accentuate the negative rather than the positive. When we behaved well, they expected it and therefore didn't say anything. When we did something wrong, they jumped all over us. But don't you think it's important to correct kids when they're off course? The author asked. Sure, said Phil, but not without positive reinforcement, too. When we don't get caught doing anything right, we start to doubt ourselves and doubt others. Wow, I'm going to repeat that. When we don't get caught doing anything right, we start to doubt ourselves and doubt others. We begin setting up defense mechanisms to protect ourselves. We start filtering everything that comes to us through a mind that is totally dominated by negative thinking. Our minds become closed. We adopt judgmental attitudes, and our insights are fear driven. I had great parents, said the author. I don't think they were always caught me doing things wrong. So you feel really good about yourself? Generally, said the author, but I still have my doubts and fears about myself. Well, where did you pick those up? Asked Phil. Probably in school. I didn't learn like all the other kids and often got bored with school. That got me in trouble. On top of that, I wasn't a very good reader, and some of the teachers used to make me read in front of the class. It was embarrassing, particularly when I mispronounced some of the words. That's interesting, said Phil. How did you get to be a good writer? That's a story in and of itself. I wasn't supposed to be good at that either, but I got interested in leadership and then got some opportunities to teach. One thing led to another, and then I took a leadership course from my department chairman. I wanted to audit his course, but he insisted I take it for credit. This involved not only taking tests, but also writing papers. He was right. I learned a lot. At the end of the semester, he asked me to write a textbook for him. He had been teaching leadership for 10 years, but was a nervous wreck about writing. Since he thought I was a good writer, he figured we'd be a great team. He was the first person to ever praise my writing. With that encouragement, I sat down with him, and over the next year, we wrote a textbook that is still used today, almost 40 years later. His encouragement was really important, wasn't it? Asked Phil. It sure was. When you've written a book, people think you can write. And when you get other opportunities, and then you get other opportunities. Pretty soon, I realized that all that negative stuff they had told me about myself in school wasn't true. In time, I became a best selling author. It took you a while to overcome all that negative programming, didn't it, though? Asked Phil. I guess you're right about that. It's interesting. My parents accented the positive with me, but a number of people at school bombarded me with negative programming about my reading and writing skills. Phil smiled. As you can tell from your own example, if you had listened to and believed all the negative things people said, you wouldn't have achieved half of what you've already accomplished. You should feel good about that. The entrepreneur reached for the bread basket and offered it to the author. Thanks, said the author, helping himself to a slice. Two things are becoming clear as we talk. First of all, one person who shows confidence in you can make all the difference in the world. Second, we have a choice about who we're going to listen to. If I'd listened to all the naysayers in my life, I might have accepted a less challenging job and have limited expectations for myself. An encouraging word was all I needed to climb out of the negative box I'd been put in. You were lucky, said Phil. A lot of people are so beaten down that they can't hear positive feedback, even when it comes their way. They discount it. It's sad, but most people can't overcome the kind of negative conditioning you went through, said Phil with a sigh. They achieve only a small percentage of what they could because they accept too little too soon, and everything is filtered through their negative thinking and their closed, judgmental mindset. I'm glad I was only one of the lucky few. The right person came into my life at the right time. But when you put all those things you've been talking about together, it does look discouraging, said the author. It could be, agreed the entrepreneur, compared with what our creator had in mind for us. We often live our lives under a cloud of negative thinking. We put on a judge's robe when we read, listen, and watch everything, which is totally unfair to our minds, our hearts, and our futures. It's the worst case of self abuse. It's hard to be a learner if your filtering system is damaged. So, how exactly does a negative closed mind affect learning? Asked the author. The entrepreneur thought for a moment. What happens is that only an extremely small percentage of the information we receive has a chance to be remembered, let alone be allowed into our subconscious mind, accepted, and then actually applied and put to use. When we read a book, listen to an audio, watch a video, or attend a seminar, we are reading and listening with our present mental attitude, which in many cases is focused on worry, indecision, negative thinking, prejudgment, opinionated thinking, etc. All those things that people say and the sound that occurs around us is 100% of what is available for us to hear. The books and other literature we choose to pursue is 100% of what is available to enter our minds through reading. But with a closed negative mindset, by the time information that we hear or read encounters the mental traffic in our subconscious, where we can accept, believe, and understand and use it, only about 10% gets through. It's, it's like a 10-lane freeway converging into a single lane. What do you think of is the result? A traffic jam, said the author. Is there any way to break up that traffic jam and improve that percentage? Asked the author. To get the traffic jam, to get the traffic flowing again, as it were? Yes, there is, said the entrepreneur. And it's a skill that can literally revolutionize your life. Next chapter. Listening with a positive mindset. The solution to retaining more of what you learn is to listen with an open, positive mindset, said the entrepreneur. I'll give you some pointers on listening this way. He got up from the lunch table, found a pad of paper, and wrote down the following. Listen. Listen with no prejudice or preconceived ideas. Listen with a learning attitude that is excited about new information. Listen with positive expectancy. Listen with a pen in hand, taking notes. Listen with a desire to hear not only what's being said, but also what it can trigger in your imagination. And listen with a how can I use this attitude? This type of mindset can spark an aha experience that can give you the last number in the combination to the vault of life that you've been looking for, said Phil. The author had been listening closely. What you're suggesting, he said, is that if I have a positive filtering system instead of getting only 10% of what I'm hearing and reading, I will probably learn much more than I'd ever anticipated. You're getting it, said Phil with a smile. That often means you see connections to other things you've been exposed to, including ways you can apply your knowledge that you never thought before. But that requires being open to new information, wherever it may come from. That's the way we grow best, with an open, positive mind. Seeds planted on good soil produce many times what is sown. This is what excites me, continued the entrepreneur, because it leads to possibility thinking. Instead of getting 100% of what you are reading or hearing, your open mind allows you to increase your knowledge many times more. Not only do you clear the traffic jam, you open up a whole new roads. Sometimes you leave the road altogether and start flying because an open positive filtering system can ignite our creativity, ingenuity, and resourcefulness. We can create possibilities way beyond our wildest dreams. I wonder if that explains why we see people every once in a while who far outperform others. I wonder if that explains why we see people every once in a while who far outperform others, said the author. Not just doubling their performance, but outdoing their performance by 100 to 1. Yes, said the entrepreneur. These are possibility thinkers. People who are open to new information and who are constantly looking to apply that new information in ways far beyond what their teacher, mentor, or coach ever imagined. They are possibility listeners, possibility participants, and possibility doers. A possibility mindset not only can lead to a permanent change of attitude, but also can impact performance and results. Have you ever had a personal experience of power of possibility thinking? Asked the author. I sure have, said Phil. One Sunday I came out of church all fired up. I was in an incredibly creative mood. I turned on the radio in my car and heard a song that inspired me. I pulled off the road and made an outline of a lesson for one of the courses that I planned to teach. That course eventually turned out to be the flagship of our product line and our best-selling program for more than 30 years, bringing in over 100 million in profits. The fact that I had the positive attitude and was the main reason that was the fact that I had a positive attitude was the main reason this happened. If I'd attended the service with a negative attitude and been negative about the preacher, sermon, or music, I would have gotten stuck in the mental traffic jam like everybody else, but I had the lanes wide open that day, which took me to places I've never dreamed of. Sounds like possibility thinking has really impacted your life and your business. It certainly has, said Phil. To the author, it was all sounding good to be true. It was all sounding too good to be true. But even possibility thinking can only get you so far, he said. Aren't some things just impossible? Possibility thinkers do the impossible with great regularity, replied the entrepreneur. Possibility thinking was involved when Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile on May 6, 1954. They said it wasn't humanly possible, but Bannister ran the mile in 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. That was unbelievable in 1954, but once it happened, within several weeks, John Landy hit 3 minutes and 57.9 seconds. In the next 15 years, Roger Bannister's record was beaten 260 times by men in 177 races. Jim Ryan, as a senior high school in Kansas, beat Bannister's record in 1965 with a time of 3 minutes and 55.3 seconds. Once breaking the 4-minute barrier was repeated over and over, it was seen as doable, and in that process, it changed nature of thinking about the 4-minute mile from negative, can't be done, to positive, I can do it. The author said, "You make a good case for having a positive mindset, Phil, not just because it will help people learn, but also because it creates possibility thinkers who can accomplish great things and even alter history." It's important to remember, though, that even with a positive possibility mindset, repetition is required. Only after a number of people beat Bannister's record did naysayers become yay sayers. We've come to understand that 62% of all ideas are accepted only after they are. To finish his sentence, Phil turned to a fresh page in his notebook and wrote, presented, 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 presented. The author nodded thoughtfully. I think I know what you mean. The way I overcame the negative programming I got in school looked something like this. He pulled out a pen from his pocket and wrote, I can't write, I can't write, I can't write, I can't write, I can't, I can write, I can write, I am an author. The entrepreneur said, it's interesting that presenting 6 times seems to be the secret to spaced repetition. Why do you think that's so? I found that when people are first exposed to a new idea, they reject it because it conflicts with their preconceived ideas. The second time they're exposed to a new idea, they resist it because they can't accept it. The third time they're exposed to a new idea, they're partially accepted but it has reservations as it adds to its use. The fourth time people are exposed to any idea, they fully accept it because they feel it expresses what they've been thinking. The fifth time they're exposed to a new idea, they partially assimilate it by using it themselves. The sixth time they're exposed to a new idea, they fully assimilate it by owning it and passing it along to others. The entrepreneur rose from the table. I have some handouts on this from my seminars. Follow me. Phil led the author into his home office and pulled some papers from his file cabinet. This is how it works, he said as he gave the handout to the author. It read, from rejection to assimilation. First exposure, rejection. I reject it because it conflicts with my preconceived ideas. Second exposure, resistance. Well, I understand it, but I can't accept it. Third exposure, partial acceptance. I agree with the idea, but have reservations as to its use. Fourth exposure, full acceptance. You know, the idea expresses the same way I've been thinking. Fifth exposure, partial assimilation. I've used that idea today. It's terrific. Sixth exposure, full assimilation. I gave that idea to one of my salespeople yesterday. In the truest sense of the word, the idea now belongs to me. Thanks, said the author. This will be very useful. But let me ask you something. After I broke through the negative filtering around my writing, I seem to have developed a much more positive mindset toward a lot of things. Do you always go through the 6-step process? No, there's a shortcut, said Phil. There's more positive experiences you have with positive thinking. You are able, the more positive experiences you have with positive thinking, you are able to go through the 6 steps almost automatically and creative ideas begin to spring up almost instantaneously. Eventually, you move forward being an inverted paranoid like me. What's an inverted paranoid? The author asked. Inverted paranoids are people who think the world has conspired to only do good for them. That's really the ultimate result of becoming a positive thinker. I'm going to repeat that. Inverted paranoids are people who think the world has conspired to only do good for them. That's really the ultimate result of becoming a positive thinker. It's a journey, and sometimes people need help along the way. The author thought about that for a moment. Can you give me an example of someone in your organization who previously had a dysfunctional filtering system and changed into a positive possibility thinker? He asked. Yes, I can, and I'll introduce you to her. She's Susan Alcott, our Chief Operating Officer. Susan is one of the brightest young women I know and a great COO, but she was driving me and everybody on my management team crazy because she was the ultimate negative thinker. She tossed a wet blanket on every new idea. The author smiled. Aren't chief operating officers supposed to do that? He asked. Their job is to make sure you do things right. As protectors of the operation, sure, they need to know how to say no, but Susan was draining everybody's energy. Since then, her turnaround has been fabulous. Why don't you go and talk to her? I'd love to meet her, the author said. You know where to get an appointment. And why don't I meet you in my office tomorrow so we can process what you've learned?